Good morning, and thank you for being here. I believe when Ron invited me, he thought I'm accepting a task of doing this. No, I see it as an opportunity. And relating to the two exciting talks before me, I'm an Altecacker, not very far from Stanley. I was born at the year World War II ended, both of us in our 70s, and I believe we viewed much more in concern than with excitement the future that Mati painted for us. That's being an Altecacker. Slightly different from Stanley. I was born in Israel. As a matter of fact, here in this city, not far away from here, in a hospital that was called Molada today, it is Elisha or something like that. And as opposed to Stanley, I did fly fast airplanes. And my main problem over the last 50 years is how to overcome the lack of fear and overconfidence which fighter pilots in Israel possess. As a matter of fact, I tell people that the presence of pilots and the graduates of 8200 in startup nation arena is the 8200 is because of their profession, education in the armed forces that gives them the tools. The pilots is because their overconfidence is adequate to a startup where 95 to 99% will fail. They just believe it does not happen to me. They live in a bubble. We grow in a bubble that is called a cockpit. And the main thing to teach pilots is how to at least act as if fear is a rational response to the world. I hope my grandchildren will not grow with robots. I hope my grandchildren will have a better future than talking to Rinko. And as opposed to too many Altecackers in the audience then. I thought I will be modern, but I'm a little backward with the technology of my presentation after seeing that of Mati, but what can I do? I was artificial intelligence in MIT 40 years ago, and to me, what was presented was not artificial intelligence, but artificial presence. It has to be intelligent in order to be artificial intelligence, and to me, it's not that yet, but I accept that people call it that way. We'll start with a puzzle that will relate to at the end of the talk. Please tell me, this picture at the center, is it more like what you see on the left of it or on the right of it? A computer that analyzes the picture will say the right image because it has an orange blob over a red thing or so. Maybe 90% of the pixels are identical or similar. I believe most of you who are not cows or birds choose the one on the left. We'll get to it when we finish our reading class. Now, invention. What is an invention? Well, very few, once in a generation, there is a genius whose invention is pure, out of thin air, out of their mind. People like Einstein, Newton, Beethoven, or Agnon, each one in his own area creates something that was not there in the world before they did. Most of us, 99.9999 many digits after the point, are not that. We do not possess that capability. We are those of us who are inventors, in the sense of patents today. I've seen yesterday the annual issue of the National Academy of Inventors of the rating the universities in the world, which one has the most number of utility patents in the US. I think the first one in Israel is about 38 or so, the Technion. And oh, by the way, the number of patents that I have personally is more than that of the Weizmann Institute. And the type of those is more a taking an observation in one area and applying it to be a useful construct in another area, such as taking an A-bomb, the atomic chain reaction, and harnessing it into a power plant, or as our prophet many years ago said, reshaping swords into plowshares. So taking something from one field and converting it into a useful device in another field. And I want to go through two examples that relate to two of the companies that I started and invented in that sense in. The first one has to do with, I'll do it that way. The first one is a company called Valve Medical, and it relates to a field that is young. This is a field of replacing heart valves by catheterization instead of open heart surgery. So instead of opening the chest, taking the heart out, putting it on a tray, disconnecting it from the aorta, putting it on a heart-lung machine, and opening the aorta and replacing the valve, doing it by catheterization. And what we do is we take a construct like you see here on the right that has a frame that when open will displace the thick leaflets of the valve, and in it there are leaflets made of pericard, of either a calf pericard or a porcine pericard. And people then press it small enough to fit inside a catheter that will go into our femoral artery in the groin and deliver it without opening the chest. The problem is that this construct is large enough and has in it biological material that is sensitive. You cannot press it very small. And even in the catheter, like here, the size of the catheter is that, about 9 to 10 millimeter. 25% of the people sitting here, if they needed it, could not get it because your femoral artery is not large enough. And more than 50% of the Oriental population, the femoral is too small because their arteries are about 20% smaller than ours. So what do you do? Over there. Okay. The idea came to me about 12 years ago when I was driving on my way to the home of my parents in a kibbutz, not far from here, when I was stuck for an hour behind a caravan of about 12 semi-trailers carrying parts of a turbine to the Hedera power plant to be assembled in situ. Why parts and why 12 semi-trailers? Because the turbine, when it is built, is way too big to travel through transportation arteries. So you take parts that are small enough and then assemble it in situ. What you see here is, for example, in this place, yes, you see how even a small part, this part, is traveling through the transportation artery. You see for a wind turbine how a single blade is transferred in transportation artery and then assembled in situ. So why not solve the problem of size of the valve, of the artificial valve, in the same way. Okay, this is the way our valve is built. As you can see, it is built of two parts. Sorry. First of all, the frame that will, when open, will displace the native SiC leaflets of the valve, and then another part that has the artificial valve made of bovine pericard. And only when they are assembled, they make something very similar to what you saw today. But because I'm doing it separately, so you can see the frame that has the leaflets in it, which is the main problem of making it small, is made of a shape memory metal, such that for delivery, I first of all open it, and with that I gain size because the diameter now becomes elongated, it's factor 3. Then I collapse it like a rhomboid collapse, and that with the leaflets will fit into a very small catheter, and the result is a catheter that is 3 millimeter instead of the 9 millimeter, and would fit into each and every one of the patient that need it. And you see here the process of assembling it right next to the position of the valve in the heart. We first of all open from the catheter the frame, then we kind of spit out the elongated ring that shaped by itself to its ring formation by the shape memory of the metal, and then we assemble it by pulling wires. We assemble it into a working valve. I think I want you please to run this video, which will show you an animation of how it is done. So we push it through the groin in order to have time to assemble in position. We open at the aorta, here at the chest, a temporary valve that will stabilize the patient while we are doing the procedure. This is a very simple, not very effective, but good enough to keep the patient stable. And then we go to the position of the SiC valve. We first of all will spit out of the catheter the frame that will displace the unhealthy leaflets, and then spit the valve itself that is elongated but reshaped into a ring, and with wires we'll pull it to place, and retracting the delivery system, we now have a working valve with the leaflets, 3 leaflets, such as most of us have biologically. Now, animations are very easy to make. Animations and the patent took me very little time. Developing the device is something else, but in order to show that you can develop a device, if you could run this video, please. This is patient number 5. You're seeing right here the end of the catheter in position already, and as the catheter is retracted, first of all, the frame is starting to open and deploy and displace the SiC leaflets. In a minute, this will be over. And now the frame is in place. I'm pulling slightly higher with the catheter, and here I'm starting to spit out the ring with the artificial leaflets, and as you can see, as it goes out, it reshapes into a ring by itself. And once it is out, it is pushed by wires into position and locked in position. This is an operating and working valve, and this was done through a not 3 but 4 millimeter catheter, but the version we have now is a 3 millimeter already. This was basically assigning an idea that we all know and use of, if we have a big thing that will have to move from one one area to another, we'll move it in parts and assemble it in situ. Only here it solves a health issue. Next. I'm sorry, this is the end of it. I'm showing you the distribution of diameters of the femoral artery, the axis, and as you can see in blue, our population, and you can see what is the size of the competitor system and the size of my catheter, and you can see that it is especially useful for oriental population in green, where almost 50%, this would be too big to get into the femoral artery. The next thing, passive sensors. This is a developing thing in medical devices. Those would be sensors that we want to implant chronically in the body of patients, sensors that we will be able to monitor continuously to follow an important parameter of the disease we are treating, an important parameter that will let us either change medication, change the dose of a medication when it becomes not effective enough, and so on, and not wait for the system to collapse. It's like our temperature gauge in our car that will let us treat the car and not wait for smoke or steam come out of the engine before we know there's a problem. Now, the main problem with the systems that are existing today is that you're looking at an eyeball. And for example, if I wanted to measure the pressure in the eyeball in glaucoma patients, a glaucoma that is the #1 reason for blindness at the end of time, and people get different medication and they get adapted and you have to change it or to increase the dose and so on. So if I had a continuous measurement of eyeball pressure, it would help me manage the disease. But the size of the only existing chronically implanted sensor is shown on the right here. And it would hardly fit into that eye. I cannot use it there. The problem is size. Another problem is, even when you can implant it, is that 99% of the volume is the power pack. And if the power pack is made smaller such that you have to replace it, you'll have to intervene again when the battery is empty. So the problem is to make something that is small enough to fit into organs where you need it, not interfering with the organ function, and something that will be passive. Here is where inspiration came. 40 years ago, when I was still the head of R&D in the Israeli Air Force, we had a problem. We needed to prepare to fly and get very accurately to very far away targets, such as this arrow leads to. You can imagine what this was in the late 70s. And the problem is, you're flying over a desert. There are no features to identify and navigate on, so you rely on your navigation system. At that time, most of you in the audience may remember the time before GPS. When I have young audience, it's hard to imagine. And what we had is inertial systems. Inertial system is a system that count speed and direction. So if you know where you're starting from, accumulating speed and direction, you know where you are. The only problem is it has an error, accumulated error of about 1%. And if you want to go 1,000 miles away, you will be off by about 10 miles, which is not good enough to pull up and attack a target. So what we needed was to have at some positions something that the pilot will be able to identify, and with its known position to correct the error. What we did was we made something that is called a corner cube. Those small aluminum arrangements that, because they have 90 degrees angle, wherever you shine a radar energy on it, all of it goes back to exactly the same direction. So all the energy comes back to you, there's no dispersion of energy, and therefore, even though it's very small, you'll be able to see it. Another thing, it's a reflector, it's passive. So you take this 40 centimeter or so device, bury it 40 centimeters under sand, and forget about it. You only do not forget its position, so that when you're flying over it with an airplane, when you illuminate it with your radar, you see its position and can correct it. Small, passive. Small and passive is what I wanted my sensor to be, and I created a sensor that is basically like a drum with a little housing and a very thin membrane filled with a known pressure and hermetically closed, such that if there's more pressure outside, the membrane will be tensed and its self-frequency will grow higher. So when I excite it with ultrasound, the membrane will be excited and will respond back at its own frequency that is different. If I give it 5 different frequencies, it will respond with the highest peak at the frequency that is related to the pressure around it. And I can then measure pressure and make a very small sensor because it's passive. I don't need a power pack and can last forever because I don't need to load it or so. And when someone from the largest companies of medical devices, Medtronic, came to me and brought me this image of a penny with their future very small sensor that they are working on, I did put on it my sensor, and I made an enlargement here. It's basically dotting the I of liberty, and as compared to the one in the market that I showed you before, you remember it, this is the ratio. And therefore, first of all, I can make thousands of them on a single wafer, and then this is in animal trials where the black line is measurement of a pressure sensor, traditional, and the blue is the measurement of my sensor. And it has all kind of arrangement to be put in organs that you are interested in. If it is to be put in an artery or another pipeline in the body, there is the sensor connected to a stent-like thing that will only hold it in place, and this is the catheter that will deliver it. If it is to be put in organs that are not pipe-like, it is connected at the top of at the top of a push pin with a little arrangement that will keep it in place and can be implanted by a needle. And therefore, we can put it in very tight places like ventricles in the brain for patients that we need to control pressure in the ventricle after intervention, after accidents, or kids with hydrocephalus and so on. It can be placed in the eyeball, and this is the real relative size, as opposed to that thing that you remember from the first slide, and it has many different applications that I am going to finish with and go to the next short topic. Reading. I don't know how exactly you teach inventiveness, but I know that reading is a way to stimulate that ability in every one of us to the level his ability can take him. And the reason is that exactly the way I defined inventiveness is transformation of one thing into something else. While reading, we are, without any attention to it, we learn to do the following transformation. We basically transform lines into letters. We transform letters into words. We transform words into sentences, and then we transform sentences into stories. And this is the first time it gets to our awareness. Once we have a story like that, we create a canonical representation of it in our visual world. When we see a picture like that, we will create a story like that. When we read a story like that, we'll create a vision like that you see. And probably while reading, we are going from right to left. While dreaming, we are going left to right. And the problem is that if our kids will learn to consume only visual stimuli, like television, films, whatever, you're engaged with the message only at that level. You miss all these levels of transformation that I believe are very important. We're doing a very important and complicated job of encoding things. For example, take these two words. Do you see any difference? Even now, I don't know if all of you expect what is going to happen, but once it happens, we immediately have a great difference between them, and we have this picture in our mind. This was a very delicate encoding. I want to finish that part by saying that basically to me, if we do not succeed in capturing reading as something that our kids are involved in from a young age, or finding some good replacement to it that does not skip the work, I'm afraid we're going to lose an ability. The last thing that I want to mention relative to technology is the special, as opposed to Mati, for example, I'm in the med tech rather than high tech that is related to computers. High tech that is related to computers is somewhat easier in two senses. Our complication is that in the biotech or medtech, if you have the inventor and you have the investor, Mati and Stanley. The inventor sees a stent or thinks about a stent and thinks this stent could save lots of lives. The investor sees the stent and thinks this company could make a fast return. So this guy creates a time scheme in his head and says 3 years of R&D, 3 years of clinical development, 1 year of regulatory improvement, And in 7 years, in the optimistic scenario, I will have a product. I'll finish. Well, this guy thinks 1 year further investment, phase 2, and then another year and there's an exit. And in 2 years, there's a big misunderstanding and tension that develops. It happened to me when starting Mednol, and with the capital venture fund that invested in Mednol, I gave them an investment opportunity of $280,000 in spite of, in 4 years, getting out with $47 million. They still today think that I wasted their opportunity and dragged them too far because they expected it in 2 years. That's a problem. Another problem is the following problem. In computer high-tech, the skills required for the developer and the skills of the typical customer are very similar. Whereas in biotech or medtech, there is no overlap. You need someone who understands medical science and life sciences, and not only material science, mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. This is a much more complicated development team. This is a team that we need to develop over a much longer time. And because I've been shown that time is over, I will not go over the other part of my presentation that is only optional. Thank you very much.